back again. This will only be the second part. We've had a look at this beautiful taper stick. And just in case I didn't say, and you know, if you've got any questions, just send them to me. A taper stick is simply for burning a shorter candle to melt sealing wax to seal your letter, and that would sit on your desk. It's not a, you don't walk around with it. It's not a chamber stick. It's there for your desk to specifically to melt sealing wax. So we've looked at that. Now I want to look at another bit of spectacular Sheffield silver. Now here's the trick. Now for my next trick, I shall turn this into 2. And do you know what those are? The clever ones will. All the dealers will. They'll be going, they're stands for your iPhone. No, they're not. These are snuffer stands or snuffers trays. So snuffers, which aren't really snuffers either, they are the scissor action, sprung scissor action form. They're wick trimmers. They trim the wick of your candle before you had self-consuming wicks. And it stopped them guttering and the candle going everywhere, because candles were quite expensive things. They have a sort of little box on them and scissor action. And they made a lot of them in Sheffield. And these are extremely grand, beautifully made neoclassical, all the big words, neoclassical snuffer stands. And they do come in pairs. They often come in pairs, but these are whoppers, and you can see all the lovely pierced and bright cut engraved decoration and the horrific reflections of me in the surface. So we'll try and stop doing that. These are assayed for Patrick Robertson of Edinburgh in 1783. So again, you think I'm going to have lost my marbles because we're talking about Sheffield. In 1783, and only in 1783, Patrick Robertson put an order in to a Sheffield silversmith for various objects of silver. There are these snuffers trays. 2 years ago, I saw a pair of shorter table candlesticks from this same service, and it was all in the latest neoclassical style, and it was delivered up to Edinburgh. Robertson, as you can tell, was fairly proud of this, and he struck his marks, right where you could see them, right where the client could see them. Patrick Robertson, and they were submitted to the Edinburgh Assay Office, who very happily put their marks on in 1783 without noticing at all that they'd been assayed the same year at Sheffield by the firm of Daniel Holly Wilkinson and Company, who'd made the bloody things in the first place. And the marks are there. They're on both of them. Almost clear as day, because the chasing goes over the marks, but you can see them as clear as anything. But Robertson made a point of all of these items either being overstruck with his mark, obliterating the Sheffield marks, or just simply more prominently marking them. So what does this mean? Well, this means the attitudes towards Sheffield silver weren't confined to London. They were all over the place at the time. And again, 1783, it's the first 10 years of the Sheffield Assay Office being set up. But it also means that these snuffer stands are phenomenally rare. There are not many pieces of British silver that remain that are struck with the same marks for the same year from 2 different assay offices, and certainly not from one from an English assay office and one from a Scottish one. Pieces from this service, when they do turn up, like the candlesticks I saw a couple of years ago, the candlesticks, very workmanlike, very, absolutely fine, nothing wrong with them. But they made £6,000 all in with premiums because they bore 2 sets of different assay office marks, and I must stress, for the same year. This wasn't something that had been made a long time ago, 30, 40, 50 years earlier, and then resubmitted for assay. This is something that had current marks on it, and there was no need to have it reassayed, but they did, and they did it for prestige. So, I mean, thankfully, the Sheffield Assay Office is regarded slightly higher these days. And nobody overstrikes marks on things anymore, but it did happen. It happened in the 18th century, and this is part of the history of silver, and it's also the history of hallmarking. But these are rather splendid things. You'd have to pay me a king's ransom to let go of them, but some of you watching may have a king's ransom, so I might. The other thing to mention, and I might just show you this if I rake it in the light. You see scratches running down there. You think, oh, he's scratched his snuffer trays. No such things. These are the original assay scrapes, because before they hallmarked a piece of silver, they had to test that it was sterling silver. That was the whole point of it. That you weren't buying, you know, a bit of tin or some horrible bit of Sheffield plate that somebody had conned you with, and they would have a very sharp, like a little curled razor, and they could just go up and down and just take tiny little scraping. I mean, you can barely feel it. You can see it, but you can barely feel it. And they'd scrape the back of it, and if something is well polished over a couple of hundred years, you lose these marks, they go. But if something is untouched, and these are in, I mean, there's the odd little dint, but I think you get the gist. These are in absolutely fabulous condition for something that's, you know, the thick end of 240 years old. These are tremendous. These are just, you know, someone's popped them away and they've been untouched for all those years, with their original crests as well. All the same family crests on any of these pieces that you find, with both Robertson's mark and Daniel Holly and Wilkinson's mark on the back. One little consignment sent up to Edinburgh. There isn't anything else that we know of. And if you find a piece, you're extremely fortunate. The moment I was shown these by a specialist Scottish silver dealer, I almost broke his arm getting them off him. I was that fast. You won't see them again. This is why I'd be reluctant to sell them. I would sell them, but only as needs must. You get one opportunity in your lifetime to buy something like this. Before we go, I told you I was going to keep it short. You can't believe it, can you? Before we go, I want to show you this, and this is a salt cellar, and this is another Sheffield rarity, because I do like my peculiarities and my rarities. I am drawn to them because I am both peculiar and rare. Again, this is a little salt cellar that's made in much the same way it would have been made if it was made in Sheffield plate, which is to say these claw and ball feet, which I hope you can see. In London, they'd be cast. These have been stamped out of two sections, again the stamping process for Sheffield plate, and they've been soldered together, which is why they've all split along the lines. Now, I originally had a set of 3 of these, and decided to sell a pair to a very clever chap who was clever enough to buy them at the time, and snapped my hand off, and I've kept one. And the reason I've kept them is they're by Tudor and Leader, who were the first silversmiths in Sheffield to submit an item for assay. It's a big cup and cover that came up at auction about 10 or 12 years ago, and happily the Sheffield Assay Office ended up buying it. Not from me, of course. I'm a lowly provincial dealer. They bought it from an illustrious firm of London dealers for many times what they paid for it at auction. But as I say, this partnership were the first to assay silver at Sheffield. And I'd like to tell you when this was assayed, and I think I know when it was assayed. I think it was assayed in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the assay office being open, because there's a horrible mistake on it. And there was a horrible mistake on the other two, which shows that this is less an aberration, more somebody not really understanding what they're doing. Now, when you assayed silver, and we talk about the town mark, they applied the town mark. It wasn't just one punch. You know, it wasn't a one punch in a glass case that they put under arm guard. Do you want to use the town mark? We'll get it for you. It was the same device on multiple punches, so multiple people could assay all manner of different articles through the working day, and also different sizes of punch. You may want to put your mark on something quite large, like a salt cellar. You might want to hallmark the blade of a little fruit knife. She's only tiny, so it wasn't sensible to have just one size of hallmark, because the tiny marks on something large would look insignificant, you wouldn't notice them, and of course a big hallmark on a small item is going to cause it damage. So what's gloriously happened with this, and I must say this, you know, this is probably only ever going to be for sale from me at sort of gunpoint, or under some, you know, if some voluptuous creature tries to entice me and lead me into bad ways for the price of a salt cellar. Probably get rid of it for that. This has the two versions, the two sizes of Sheffield town mark. And the smaller one, I suspect, has been struck in error instead of the first date letter. And I think this probably happened very early on when the assay office was set up. Somebody made a mistake, they reached for the wrong punch, which of course tells you that all the punches were beside them. You know, the standard mark, the town mark, the date letter, they're all there, and they just picked up the wrong one. For 4 salt cellars, I would imagine, even though I only had 3, it would have been a set of 4 that were assayed at the time, and struck them all in error. So as far as I know, apart from the 2 I sold to a very wise young man, he'll go far, this is the only example you will ever see with 2 Sheffield town marks on it of different forms. You will sometimes see error marking where the same town mark, you'll see it on London, you'll see it sometimes on Newcastle and Birmingham Silver, particularly Birmingham actually, because, you know, we're crackers. The same town mark struck twice in error, but this is 2 different sizes of town mark for the same year, and the omission of the date letter. And the omission of the date letter tells us that it was done in error. But a wonderful thing, and that's an unusual piece of Sheffield silver. So those that's a brief window. I mean, we haven't covered much, I'm afraid, but a brief window into Sheffield silver. And again, provincial silver, isn't it fascinating how attitudes and values change over the years? Next week, again, something entirely different. And we will, at some point this year, because it's also their 250th anniversary, we will touch on Birmingham silver, and I might go on a lot more about that. I might need to be gagged or muffled. But until then, I hope you've enjoyed these 2 short films. I hope they were short enough, and I shall see you next week.